Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. Today's guest is the amazing Nani Langenstein. I met Nani in my Conscious Parenting Institute with Dr. Shefali Sabari. We've worked together extensively since that time. And not only have I gotten to know her soul on a professional level, I've been able to get to know you personally too, Nani. And wow, I've got to say, what she brings to this world is an openness to healing, a willingness to keep learning, and hold all those around her in the highest regard. I know her to have a commitment to interconnection and ultimately inner transformation. So let me tell you a little bit more about Nani. She spent many years as a successful engineer in the avionics industry. After leaving engineering, she felt drawn to discovering more about the principles of consciousness in soul care teachings. Those principles not only resulted in her own deep healing and self discovery, but in her healing relationships with her daughters. She now uses these principles to coach others who are seeking healing with themselves and with others. So, welcome, Nani.
Wow, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. hard to hard to top that. So thank you
Yeah.
very much. Yeah.
Oh, you're so welcome. And we're here today talking about consciously raising adult children, a
Mm,
topic that you've been talking about putting out into the world for a while.
mm,
And it blows me away to think about this topic of consciously raising adult children because we know that so much of our literature and information about there is for young children and how we raise them from birth to even 18 when they might go to college. But we are talking about, even though we didn't set out an age range, really our adult children. So think of it 18 plus, 21 plus, whatever comes to mind. Um, and I think you and I both believe that it's never too late as parents to learn new skills, that change is possible, transformation is possible, and that it takes a patience and willingness to do the work. So, welcome here
absolutely.
today.
Thank
And
you.
if you want to tell us a little bit more before we start talking about consciously raising adult children, about your background and what you did before you came into the coaching world and what drew you to the coaching world.
Yeah, well, I'd I'd imagine if not the furthest that engineering is very vastly different than where I am right now and where my passions lead me right now. Um, Engineering is a very process, a very linear field, and especially avionics, where you're creating equipment that literally the safety of others is dependent on. So there's not a lot of room for, consciousness and whatever. But really I came into sort of consciousness and that approach um, kind of randomly. I was um, just happened to be listening to the radio. I had been having some difficulties, challenges with my teenage and adult college age daughters. Um, and what I was doing just wasn't working. I was taking them to counselors and saying basically, how do we help them to work with me better? Because of course, I'm doing everything I can as a mother. And then I heard this conscious way of thinking, and it just made so much sense to me, and started really eagerly seeking. And you know, I left the engineering field and just continued to find that passion in the consciousness and the soul care aspects of healing, not only my relationships with my daughters, but realizing that really it had to start with my healing within. So that's kind of the story of how I got on this path. And I'll just say, we're still on our path, but my relationships and with myself and my daughters is drastically transformed by applying these principles. So
Wow.
I've seen how they work.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's a beautiful story and so so intentional, this place of kind of honoring and intentionality we move into when we're even willing to consider that we have something to learn. And I love that because what you're just saying is that all roads lead back to us. And when you began that path of knowing that you also maybe had some work to do you remember what some of your beginning revelations were?
I think, like I said, I went into my youngest daughter, I went into her counseling session and just basically was like, look, this is what she's doing. This is what she's doing. How do we help her? Uh, and it was just sort of, it was a little overwhelming when I recognized, like, oh, I'm coming to her with emotion.
Yeah.
I'm coming to her um, with my agenda.
Hmm.
And how do I begin to work with myself and take care of myself so that I can show up to her in a different way?
Hmm.
And that was really transformative and just began this eagerness and this passion of just searching of like, okay, how do I take care of myself? And that was really the most transformative part of
I
that
love that.
journey.
Yeah. And we go about having children. Dr. Shafali had kind of taught us somewhat unconsciously, not for
Yeah,
all of us. That's not true for all of us, but for many of us. So when we enter the parenting relationship with our child, we absolutely have no roadmap. And, now there are so many more books, but a lot is trial by fire with parenting. We all know that it's one of the toughest jobs, if not the most challenging.
yeah,
I'll speak from my own experience that I've been through, but that we also don't always realize when we begin that journey that we're bringing our whole past with us, and that our past really informs how parenting plays out for us, the way that we view our role. Maybe if there's hierarchy in there, maybe if there's things like I'm right or there's something to fix here, in how our
yeah,
children are showing up. But I that was a big revelation for me, is when I figured out that I was recruiting a lot of what was maybe, I want to say, what happened to me in my childhood, that they form my belief systems. But I also knew that it was something was incongruent with how I really wanted to parent. And I think
mm,
that's sort of interesting, uh, that we do have a knowing inside, that look at this. It doesn't matter when we begin to realize this. We can have many years of parenting under our belt, but that fire can come alive of something new at any point. So those were just like a couple different avenues, but thoughts on that?
yeah. I think a lot of us enter in to parenthood with these idealistic expectations of how it's going to go. Um, but very few of us recognize that our children will be our
Yeah.
biggest teachers,
Hmm.
or certainly one of them, and we'll be challenged in ways that we just didn't expect. And as a
Hmm.
teacher, um, as you're kind of speaking to, when you grow up, and all of us have something that we're bringing in that maybe needs some attention within from our childhood. I had a fairly, challenging childhood, and and part of that was like I wanted my children above all to be happy, right?
Hmm.
That was my big goal. And so when they were unhappy, that triggered this need within me to be happy, them to be happy, and the fixing kicked in, right? That's when the fixing kicks in. And you don't even realize that you're sort of, while my intention was to not have my children suffer through the things that I did and have the wounds that I did,
Mhm.
in actuality, I gave them a lot of that stuff by a different method,
Yeah.
by the intense need to
Mm.
fix. It just became, and other things, it just became, they still ended up with some of those wounds. And our children will resist at some point in time. They will resist um, the fixing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they crave autonomy, especially in the older, as they get into the teens and into the adulthood, for sure. So
Mhm.
so that causes conflict for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm sitting here thinking, the title of our chat today is that consciously raising our adult children, right? So we've kind of inadvertently talked about our ways that we considered ourselves unconscious, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I mentioned the one of I'm bigger, stronger than you are, sort of a hierarchy. You mentioned like the fixing and looking outward, even looking outward to others to help sort of find the answer.
Mm.
Um, and it is an awakening. So if we say, like, what is consciousness around this? I think of it is an awakening within us that something more is possible. And you named that we as parents might be part of that call for change to look at ourselves. But what does that consciousness kind of mean to you?
Um, well, consciousness to me means that um, I have the ability to have a higher level of thinking,
Mm, mhm,
and I can look at my challenges, I can look at my wounds and have a different perspective to them,
yeah.
that they aren't who I am.
Mhm,
And so it gives you that perspective of who you are, and that who you are in essence doesn't really need fixing.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it may need healing for sure. There may be
Oh
aspects of
yeah.
you that definitely need healing, but ultimately you are whole, you
Mhm,
know.
mhm.
And yeah, so
Yeah, I love that. It makes me about want to cry, um, because it has such beauty in that kind of coming from this higher place, knowing that we can. I think that you and I have done so much of this study and work and sort of self-focus too, that we know transformation is wholly possible.
mm,
And you mentioned seeing your own wholeness, seeing that everything that comes before us is not bad or wrong. It occurred, and so many times it was incredibly painful for so many
mm,
of us, yet it led us to where we are today, and that sort of path that we're finding. And more of this message is beginning to spread,
mm,
because it's the healing that people need. I love what you said about I don't need fixing, I may need healing. It may be calling for healing. That right there is so beautiful.
mm.
um because to me, that when I think about a fixing energy, that's a little bit harsher. It's like there is something wrong here. How are we going to fix it? How are we going to make it whole? And then the healing is so much softer. It holds, so it has more space for the healing, more expansive, and it feels compassionate to me.
Yeah, and I like what you said there. I mean, too, um, having sort of this conscious awareness doesn't mean that there isn't pain too,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and things to deal with, but it allows for acceptance and accepting that something might be painful. And it also opens up to see that in those around us, right? I mean, when we understand a language, we're able to communicate that to others. And while I would say with, my children at any age, they would have been, um, I would have thought myself as loving and compassionate and accepting, but I can, I have access to that at an even, you know, a more abundance, in
Mm.
more abundance and limitlessness in accessing that for myself and then being able to have that to available to offer those around me.
I love it. And so, what I'm thinking of when you're speaking is, okay, how can we as individuals start nourishing ourselves with the language? Um, I think I'm thinking right now about how many times in parenting it can be so natural for us to go back to what's happened in the past
Mm,
and say, well, I showed up this way. I remember the time that I, was yelling at my child or just
mm,
engaged in conflict. And I think so often we have these ways of attaching to that and making ourselves feel some shame, feel bad, feel like it's our fault. But I often think in doing this work, we have to give so much self forgiveness to begin, this process of having a new intentionality around connection
mm,
and the possibility of what can be.
mm-hmm,
Even if, as we're talking about adult relationships, is sometimes they have become more disconnected. And so, um, but just the importance of noticing the awareness, how we always hear it starts with awareness, but it is true how
mm,
our voices come to us, how we self shame, how we self judge, and how when we're talking about a new path, that there's not a whole lot of room for that.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for both of us with older children, I mean, we can look back and we can certainly see times that we now would have chosen a different way to approach our
Mm.
parenting. Um, Certainly, I have many things, but um, you know, forgiveness is a big part of it, but also understanding. Like, we don't go into parenting, and we weren't in those places of parenting thinking, oh, I really want to have an unconscious way of dealing with my
Mm-mm.
children,
No.
or this isn't. We what we know at the time is what we do, and having some understanding and some compassion
Mm.
for that is the beginning, I think, of forgiving, and to see that that's part of consciousness, I think, is understanding that the present moment is the moment that you
Yeah.
can be acting on. um, it isn't about the past, and it isn't about
Mm-hmm.
projecting what is the future. It is
Mm-hmm.
allowing what is for you in this moment and allowing that possibility to be its own.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So to truly be in the present moment, you're saying, is releasing what came before,
Yeah,
releasing what's going to come after, because we don't know that anyway.
that's
And
right.
when we project into the future, it's probably based on what we've experienced in the past. So then
Yeah.
again, that kind of willingness to be in the present, which always feels to me like time slowing down when we allow ourselves that. But when we can be in the present moment and look at what's in front of us, then that almost allows us to see with new eyes.
That's beautifully said. I love the way that you just said that. Yeah, and allowing for our children, allowing that for ourselves, and allowing that for our children as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that so much because I love it so much because we would want that presence and that being and that letting go of the past and not projecting to the future to be afforded for us too in our
Yeah.
relationships. And that's an interesting thing because what makes our children any different than the way that we would handle a friendship with a friend or a partner. It's just like
Yeah.
it's almost like the graciousness that we can give to another human who's so clearly on their own path. Yeah, what comes to mind? I see you.
Yeah, I mean, I think about too, like this need to, not need, but this desire to forgive self first.
Mm-hmm.
It is important in our
Mm-hmm.
relationships with our
Mm-hmm.
children, right? And I think it's Gabor Mate who talks about, like, his son said to him, I don't want to be your problem. I don't want to be your mistake.
Yeah.
He wants to be seen for who he is in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And when we're coming to our children with all of that guilt and judgment, we are, they will feel it,
Yeah.
whether it's in our words, in our energy. They will feel that. And so working with that on ourselves, for ourselves, and
Mm.
healing it within ourselves is the way to begin to not put that on our children.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the question that comes to mind to me to almost ask ourselves is one of them would be, am I willing to see myself as whole? Am I willing to see myself as not in need of fixing, but healing?
Yes.
And what might I need to heal within me that I project onto my children, that I project onto another? Those are some beginning questions that come to my mind when we begin to do the inner reflective work.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it really is counterintuitive until you begin the work, right? And that it begins within us.
Mm-hmm.
And once we can, and it honestly, it stays with us,
Mm-hmm.
right? It
Mm-hmm.
never leaves. It
Mm-hmm.
is all our work. And when we continue that work, that will radiate outward, and that is the
Yes.
the way to develop these closer, more connected, more accepting, compassionate relationships with those
Mm-hmm.
around us.
Yeah. So I to stay on that part of that inner work, I think is really important because then, perhaps we can move to that outer work of the outer person, our child in that
Yes.
in our sort of outside world. But just to really be asking these questions, the reflections that you're talking about, and then know that the path is not linear, that we can begin to do the work and still mess up. And it's when we go and we do the work, I've done it tens, if not hundreds of times where I would do something differently from the way I showed up. But, we're lucky to be in conversation with each other, but also to be providing containers for these conversations because people need to know that it's okay to take the 10 steps forward, even if it's 15 steps back. I mean, we're always moving forward, but just, when we do have these times where we have an intention to show up more fully, but we're not there yet, that's okay too. That's okay. And just to hold ourselves with love and compassion and know that we just the intention of wanting to do the work is putting that out into the universe. So
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with what you're saying. And it is, and that's part of that continuing to come back to self. And, and yeah, if I lose my temper, or if I say something inadvertently even, and it's taken the wrong way, that judgment starts popping up. And, and that is a call for you. That's a call for you and your healing. That's a call for your compassion, for your understanding, that in this moment, what do I need?
Yeah.
And how can I offer myself more acceptance
Yeah.
and forgiveness? And that may end up with your children or others saying, as Susie Lula says, can I have a do-over? Or, hey, that didn't come out the way that I wanted to. This is what I
Yeah.
really wanted. There that may result in action externally, but it begins by first getting yourself back to, acceptance and non-judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love that you brought up Susie. We've both done her soul care certification.
Mm,
And when I think about her teachings, it is the compassionate container.
yeah.
And it's also honoring, like you're just saying right now, your own experience. And I almost think of when you talk about not only coming to yourself with that compassion and understanding, but then on the external, asking for the repair or the do over. I love that because I just thought that when we do that, we give that to ourselves too. That's a
Mm-hmm.
gift that we give to ourselves
Mm-hmm.
to repair something that's calling forth from within to be repaired or healed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, it may be received and it may not be received.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not our work, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Um, so we just need to keep going back within. It's like, is this my work? Is there something called of me? There's
Mm-hmm.
something needing healing within me, and and release the other, or whether it's our child
Yes.
or not, to like allow them the possibility of doing their work, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe not now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. I love that. Yeah. Maybe not now. Maybe not yet. I love
That's
when
right.
people put the yet on the end of sentences because it allows it to happen at whatever time it's meant to happen.
That's right.
I think some of the principles, one of the biggest ones for me has been in the last few years, I'd say, is truly understanding that the children that came through me brought into the world. And this is true whether, you have a child, you adopt a child, there's a child you teach, that each child is unique, sovereign. They come encoded with their own gifts, talents. Um, they also come with the lessons they're to learn in this lifetime. But what that's allowed me to do is to view I'll take my own children as independent of me, of my husband, of each other, and to allow them to sort of walk their path, even when it's unconventional, even when it doesn't go with the conventional timeline. I know what I've learned is when I'm having kind of problems with that timeline or with it not fitting into the way that things should fit in our
Yeah.
society, that it's my work to do, that I turn the mirror back to myself and I say, well, Maureen, if that's making you frustrated, or that's okay, have compassion. It's understandable. You were schooled in this way to think that that's not right because it's not, you know, so linear or so, back to the engineering field. It doesn't check the box. It
Yeah.
doesn't make the grade. It doesn't look like everything else, but
Yeah.
that's okay. And it's actually really beautiful too.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you're saying. And it goes to this notion of success. right? And success is defined by who? By culture, by your family, by, you know, but it, what if we considered success to live life authentically,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
to live life, um, of course you've got to, sustain yourself in
Yes.
society, but does it have to be conventional? Do
Mm-hmm.
you have to be conventional? I like this notion of it, we're all, um, traveling down the interstate together. And my job is to stay in my lane.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going on this interstate. And so, every once in a while I may have to beat my horn, you're drifting into my lane, or, whatever. But how do we allow our children to have their own lane
Mm-hmm.
and be with them and traveling in
Yeah.
our own lane?
Yeah. 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 I love that so much. I think I used to beat myself up more for not knowing these message earlier in my life.
Yeah.
Now I can be with that and be okay with it. And that is related to, I think, the spiritual teaching of that we do walk these paths, learning the lessons we're meant to learn at the exact right time.
Yes.
I feel like I trust in that. But staying in your own lane and affording others that same, mm, this is just a generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I say, they're sovereign, really, especially, you're more tied to their well-being when
Yeah.
they're younger.
Right.
But how do you say, this is allowing them to be a sovereign being and giving them age appropriately more and more of their own
Hmm.
right to
Hmm.
be a sovereign being, and not who I expect them to be or my idea of success, but just allowing them to be fully who they
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
and supporting that. And
Yes.
that comes from first allowing myself to
Uh-huh.
to deal with myself and my idea of what their success should be.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I think that this has been occurring for a while. It's easy to say that it's occurring now with COVID and the rise of social media, anxiety and disconnection for
Yeah.
self. But I think that we can see it with older adult children too, because for a long time in our society, it has been about the degree, the grades, the outer success, when you're married, when you have children, what your job is, those kind of things. And we've always been able to see that those don't necessarily equate to this thing called happiness or this thing called success. And so,
Yeah, can I say too
yeah.
that when you say that, what that makes me think of it is all of that also gives the impression of you're not enough
Mhm.
right where you
Absolutely.
are.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And and so you need fixing because you're
Yeah.
not quite enough.
Yes. Yes.
Or you'll be enough if you do this.
Yeah. And it's kind of a funny thing. My youngest is in high school still, a little bit older in high school, but we talk about all this being. Okay, we should just be being. We should be sitting more. We should be contemplating. We should be off our phones. Yet there's a part of parenting when I see my younger child just being, then my mind has been trained to say that's not enough, right? And so it's a practice of, okay, this is your value you're stating, are you really in alignment with that? Because if I were to truly ask myself, do you know that they will be okay even in their being? Of course, of course. So I just feel like it's such an important conversation. You could have a whole conversation about culture,
Mm.
but we were so every day of our life, we've been encultured, like you said, by either culture, family of origin, and it's there. So it's just with that gentle, compassionate way of approaching ourselves, right? That
Mm.
if we want to look at it, if you do or you don't, that's your decision. But if you want to, it's willing, it's interesting to peel back the layers and
Mm,
say, and
yeah.
then like say what of this is mine and what isn't, because you get to
Yeah.
say. Hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think I don't know, several months ago, my daughter and I were kind of looking back at our relationship and how it has evolved, and it was very I'd say toxic. Uh for both of us, honestly. But anyway, we were talking and I said, the thing is, I think that I heard in my mind, I heard you're parenting, and
Hmm.
parenting requires you to be like hands on all the time. And I
Hmm.
like, what if you substituted parenting for like, what is it I think I should be doing? You
Yeah.
know, should I be instead of parenting? Oh, I'm controlling. I'm directing. And
Yeah.
what if it's like allowing,
Hmm.
guiding,
Hmm.
supporting,
Hmm.
encouraging, you know, helping them to stay in their lane,
Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
while I'm staying in my lane.
Hmm. Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful. And it makes me think of the I always use this example, but when I read the Gary Zukov book years ago, I'm forgetting the name right now, but he talks about the modern day view of marriage, and it is two souls escorting each other, interested in each other's highest good,
Yes.
and kind of like you're saying, taking that path together. So what if we viewed our children like that?
Yeah.
It is a soul level kind of understanding, but that I'm a soul, my child is, and we're escorting one another. And as much as I'm teaching them, they're teaching me.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you were talking about before about this notion of like going back. And of course, we want to go, change things, would have changed
Yeah.
things differently. But what if that is, you know, if you, that's
Mm-hmm.
the deep look. But
Yeah.
if you take a higher look, that is their lessons for life as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we want our children to never have to be
Yeah.
in pain or suffering, but that is where growth occurs. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. I so agree. And it makes me think of too, when we think about our kids and what they might need from us, is it simply in its most basic foundational form, they need to feel like they're being heard, that they're being seen, that they matter, and that we're willing to take the time to listen. I think about that listening piece
mm.
and how if we consciously go about parenting our kids, we're stepping back and we're creating this forum for listening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's seeing them in their wholeness,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and and um and accepting them,
Yeah.
and knowing they don't need fixing. They just need us to be a mirror to show them
Mm-hmm.
who they are.
Mm. Oh, it's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, as you've been on this journey, obviously, just this topic is near and dear to your heart. How has that felt to you? Does it feel like a heart opening as you create the space for something new within you? And is it a gradual process that you almost can't see to the naked eye? Like, how is the process when you start to do this work?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, your children are used to seeing you show up in a certain way. And so they're in their patterns just like you've been in your patterns. And so um
Mm,
it really is just the gentleness of like, how is this teaching me I still need healing when they're they're responding in the way
Yeah.
that they always
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
How do I go take care of myself? How do
Mhm.
I, continuously, um, and just and just allow yourself to not always be,
Yeah. Yeah.
in that space, and uh, and just continuing to learn. And it can be a slow process, but also it's you will be, once you begin to see
Mhm.
and notice, they'll slowly change. They'll slowly, as you continue to stay open, I
Oh, yeah.
I I see that they continue to slowly open, and
Yeah.
they will develop a
Mhm.
trust that this is
Mhm.
who you are. So
Yeah, that's a beautiful breakdown and kind of description of that, because you're what I hear you saying is that the patterns that we show up with, ours take a while to dismantle, to kind of to erode a little, to grow new ways of being, and theirs will too.
yeah,
And to give them that space around it. I love that.
yeah, and really, you're you're going to be noticing. You will be
Yeah.
noticing the
hmm
changes within yourself.
Yes.
And as we've talked about, it may not be linear,
Yeah. Yeah.
but once you notice the changes within yourself,
hmm
it continues to pull you to
Yeah.
more and more and more.
I love it, because what I had just thought of when you were talking was, you said the word trust, I think, because that is something that we need to rebuild. So when you are coming with a more compassionate relationship to you and your inner worlds and your thoughts and your beliefs that you've had before, and willingness, you're starting to create a trust in yourself, and also that notion of safety, and that
Absolutely.
there's a safe place for you to land, because if we're beating ourselves up, if we're judging how we've been, that's not very safe. It's not safe on the inside. We don't usually think of it like that.
Yeah.
Certainly not safe for those on the outside. So you're kind of talking about rebuilding this relationship with yourself, that's whole, it's listening, it's trustworthy, it's willing to be intimate, it's willing to be connected. And then when you start to work on those qualities within yourself, they're naturally going to start showing up in the outer relationship, and that's what we're kind of doing.
Yeah.
We're rebuilding safety and trust. And a lot of times too, we're having this conversation mother to mother. A lot of times there's another partner in the equation that contributed to the ways things were. But we, at the end of the day, we do our own work, and we determine the ways that we want to show up, and the ways we want to feel, and the kind of life we want to have. And I
Right.
just think it just brings it back to, if connection is my highest priority, and seeing my children for who they are in their wholeness, those two things right there are just a beautiful uh just just way of being that I'm presenting to another human being, another soul.
Yeah.
hmm
Perfect. I love that.
yeah, yeah. So as we wrap up here, is there anything
Mhm.
else that comes to mind that you'd want to share with our listeners today?
Um, no, I mean, I think we've covered so much of
hmm hmm
everything, more than I think that I was thinking we'd cover. So it's great. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really, um, I think we really sort of nailed it in that, that it begins with just this beautiful relationship with self.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I can say for my own journey, um, that's the furthest thing that I would have
Oh,
thought
wow.
was the
hmm
way to get there.
hmm
Um, so so yeah, I hope if nothing else, we've encouraged everyone to just to start to see,
Yeah.
how they need to offer less judgment of
Mm-hmm.
themselves and
Mm-hmm.
more compassion. And yeah, just allow that to be the
Yeah.
way that they show up in for themselves and for others.
Yeah. It gives so much kind of hope, potential, possibility. And, just as we kind of finish the conversation, it also strikes me of what a beautiful, I'm going to use the word responsibility, but when we take on this work, it holds the potential to break the patterns of generations.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people call that the intergenerational change, and it couldn't be more true, because those who came before us came from painful places, yet we're at this time in here in 2022. We have a lot of information that's coming to us, that's we can put into practice to really change how it is going forward. So I
Mm.
just am blown away by that concept.
Yeah, I love that. And the other thing I was thinking too is like, you know, the hard part about this is that it's all within us, right?
Mm-hmm,
As
mm-hmm.
we've been talking about. And the easiest thing about this is that it's all within us,
Aw. I love that
right?
so much. Yes. Yes. It's right within you. It doesn't cost money.
Yeah.
It's full of if we're just talking about the kindness and the compassion and the love and the understanding, it's full of just a warmth and just that energetic vibration that will heal, that is
Yes.
healing.
Yeah.
Hmm. So, yes. So,
Mm.
Nani, I want to ask where people can find you if they want to reach out. I'm going to say, before you answer that question, that I know you to be a powerful healer. You've studied many different modalities now that just build upon one another and lend towards healing. So, I'd say to any of our listeners listening today, I just know you to be such a professional in your coaching, and the way that you honor individuals who come and speak to you. I know this from having almost daily conversations with you. Is just it is true, holding another in that highest regard and with that potential of being able to deeply transform the experience they're having with themselves first and foremost. It's like you are so talented with that. So
Mm.
if someone wanted to reach out to you, where would they find you?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for that. And it's deeply meaningful to me,
Mm,
to the relationship that we have. And also, I know that you see it within me because it exists within you.
mm.
So thank you. Um, but but yeah, people can reach me at my email. It's H Langenstein, LANGENSTEIN @gmail.com.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being here today. I want to say thank you to our listeners. If there's something that resonated or lifted you up today, share with a friend who might be interested in learning more about conscious parenting their adult children. But thank you, Nani.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure.
Yeah, I loved it.
Okay. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit MaureenSpielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.